Paul Weidner, welcome to the Parenting Athletic Kids podcast. Once again, great to have you, man.
Great to be here.
We have opposing weather fronts right now. I'm in Tempe, Arizona, where it's going to be 78 degrees and sunny. And Paul, what do you got cooking?
It's a blizzard right now. Wind advisory. It's a real feel of negative 11 degrees is what my phone app says. So quite the difference. Yeah, I'd rather be in your spot than my spot.
Let's jump into this. So again, this is a podcast. Paul and I are going to go back and forth on one subject. Today's topic is support. And in pretty much every podcast that I've done with either a coach or a parent or an athlete, at some point they've mentioned the importance of being supportive of the athlete. And as Paul and I were talking, what exactly does that mean? How do we exactly define that? I think it can be really broad, but our idea today is to try to hone in on a couple concepts that we think can help you to best support your athlete. So Paul, I'm going to have you jump in and kind of talk about how you think is the best foundational way to support an athlete.
Sure. Yeah. So my biggest thoughts on this, I think the most important thing I think of when it comes to support is the difference between a parent's relationship that looks like being their biggest fan versus their biggest rock and stabilizing force. And you could do a lot worse than being the biggest fan, of your son or daughter. I just think that when that's the mentality, sometimes you tend to ride the roller coaster of the ups and downs with the athlete, whether it's subtly or very outwardly, just kind of the riding of the wave that we're trying to minimize for the athlete, let alone the support they're getting, at home, versus the concept of being kind of a rock or a stabilizing force that they know they can go to when they are riding that roller coaster of emotions. And so to paint a really broad picture of it, that's where I would start. And then we can go into all the different types of specifics. Like, what does that mean? Well, it's consistency of questions. It's consistency of responses. It's good game or bad game when they come to you afterwards. What does it look like? Are you jumping up and down like you just won the World Series? Or are you like, yeah, that was awesome, but there's bigger things than that? And you smile and give them a hug and tell them you're proud of them either way. That's probably, what that looks like. We could dive more into that, but be a rock, be a stabilizing force versus being a biggest fan. And then, to kind of take it to like, well, what about the other parts of it? Or what about another side of the spectrum? Obviously, parents that have the type of relationships that say, if you strike out or you have a bad game, that you're upset with your son or daughter, probably should go without saying, but that's just not what you should be doing. I feel like that probably only needs to be said once because of the way that you probably can guess how we feel about that. But what is actually the right thing, even in the best of intentions, to behave or to act like is what I'm after.
Love it. So I love the just mindset of like, I'm the rock in this relationship. I need to be the foundation, all those things you said. I really like that picture. I think it paints a really clear picture. And we've talked about in these podcasts, and we'll continue to talk about them, how you form that, what those questions and responses and all those things look like. But give me your thoughts on a couple of like foundational things to build that rock, to build that foundation. Where would you start? Just one or two things. And again, parents, I think it would benefit you to listen to a lot of these podcasts because it will help you to really solidify being that rock. But Paul, just give us a couple of your like must-haves, go-tos for being that rock.
Yeah. So when we're asking our athletes to evaluate how they are doing, a lot of times we ask them to start with things that are completely controllable within whatever the setting is, so practice or games. And so I think that as parents, if you phrase or challenge them before a game or a practice with things that are controllable, and then after the game or practice, regardless of the result on the scoreboard, result of the stat book, whatever it is, you just ask them about those controllable things. Those questions matching up before and after can be very beneficial for the athlete to just know, like, okay, so that was what was important before, and that's what I got asked afterwards. And, oh, by the way, those were all controllable things. super steady for the athlete and a great place to start as a parent. So that's, I think the first thing is just like, what messages are you telling them? And then are those messages largely controllable? So your effort, your attitude, how good of a teammate you were you coachable? Those types of things that certainly isn't trying to make it seem like it's, church league softball or intramurals or whatever, because it's not. Especially if you have an older athlete, those games can be pretty intense, and but it still doesn't change what the messaging should be. So that'd probably be my number one piece of advice. Challenge them and ask them about controllables before and after, and build almost a framework of like the parent or the athlete gets done with their game and they go, I already know what dad's going to ask me. I already know. And that's awesome. And I know you actually talked about that with one of the athletes on this podcast before. Like, she already knew what was going to be asked. That's very comforting. That's not boring or too predictable. That's very comforting for that athlete, I think. Yeah.
Love that. That's perfect. Is there a number two? I have a number two. If you don't have one off the top of your mind,
Have at it. Hear from you.
The other thing I think really important is to lean into the character traits as opposed to the outcome-based, the athletic traits. And again, we've talked about this in other podcasts, but to Paul's point, the character stuff is controllable. Are they being a great teammate? Do they have great energy? What character traits, and this will go into my next point, do they want to develop? And my next point is having conversations about these things with your son or daughter. Like, what do we value here? What's important? What are the character traits that are going to make you a better player and a better person? So did you lean into those, focus on those during practices, during games? And then the rest of the stuff takes care of itself, right? If you're becoming more resilient as a character trait, if you're becoming a harder worker, that's a character trait. We can go through, you can Google search character traits if you want, and go through with your son or daughter. What do we value here? Off the field, off the court, on the field, on the court, put together a list of those. And those are the things you lean into. And again, Paul references this isn't church league softball. If you focus on the controllables and you focus on these character traits, you will be the best player that you can be.
Yeah.
So it's not riding the roller coaster of 0 for 4. I only scored 2 points in the basketball game. It's, did I control the things I wanted to control? And did I take steps forward in these character traits that help me develop as a player and a person? So those would be my two. Those are fantastic. My two go-tos that make you the rock in the house, not riding the roller coaster. Anything to add to that?
Yeah. So I'm really glad you mentioned that last part about getting at the point of this actually is going to make you a better player. So I think where some parents might be afraid that they lose their athlete or kind of lose the ear of their athlete is when they think the athlete, or maybe the athlete actually is, hearing them say, I just want you to be a nice person. I don't care if you're good at sports. Being able for you as a parent to explain to the athlete, articulate to them that the reason why I'm asking you these questions is actually so that you put yourself in a good position for success, because riding a roller coaster of emotion isn't good. And being coachable every day does mean you give yourself a better chance of being 1% better every day. And buying into the team concept gives you more passion and energy and joy so that you can perform better. Like, maybe the conversation shouldn't stop at those 3 controllables and they go, yeah, Dad, I know you want me to be a good person. I'm trying to win baseball games. I know you want me to be a good person. Be able to explain to them that this is actually beneficial for your athletic success in the long run. And hopefully that in the event that that's happening, won't have you lose their ear, lose that supportive relationship that you want to have with them. And you won't feel as much pressure to have to turn into somebody that always wants to talk about results, because you're like, well, my kid's really fixated on that. Like, I better talk about that with them. You don't need to. You don't need to. Hopefully they're surrounded with coaches that can handle a lot of that. And it's your job to be the person that they go, Yeah, stable, rock, steady. That's what I want to lean into. So articulate to them that it is for the benefit of their athletic success as well.
I think a way to do this, and this is what I'll do with clients and with teams that I work with, is we'll start with the goal. We'll start with the outcome, right? To make varsity this year, to hit 400, to whatever it is, to play Division I college baseball, whatever their goals are. We'll start with that, and then we'll say, okay, what are the controllable things that help us get there? Let's make a list of those. Okay, these are the things we lean into, right? These are work hard every day, get to practice 5 days a week, hit the weight room, whatever the controllables are, boom. And we look at these together and we agree on them. And okay, this is what we do. In games, these are the controllables, right? So you can really, this is just a great straightforward way to do this. This season, what are my controllables that are going to make me the best player I can be? And then what are the character traits that are going to make me the best player that I can be? I can lean into those every day. So put those lists together. If your athlete is very outcome driven, wants to win games, wants to score points, that's okay. But we need to have things that they do on a daily basis. And they dictate this list, not at 8 or 9 years old necessarily, but certainly 13, 14, let them kind of take control of this. And that goes back to something we've talked about, again, intrinsic motivation. If they take control of it, they'll really dive into it. They'll really want to do it. If we say, this is what's important, you have to be a great teammate. Yeah, okay. So let them set themselves up for success. Any thoughts on that? But that's a great, I think, that's how I do it as a mental performance coach. What are the outcomes we're trying to achieve? Okay, back that up.
Yep.
We have to do this. Controllables, character skills, controllable character skills. Thoughts?
Yep. Working backwards with the end in mind. I love that. That's so good. Such a powerful thing. And that can even apply to, some parents are wondering, how do I support my kid and get them to, want to go to training at 8 p.m. on a Wednesday night when it's cold out? Like sometimes that's the support they're looking for. And this seems much more obvious than some of the other things, but like, okay, you said you wanted to play varsity baseball. Let's work that backwards to what you can do about that today. You should probably go to hitting at 8 p.m. So like, don't disconnect those two things, and working backwards with the end in mind is really powerful. I like that a lot. Good.
Love it. Let's touch on one more thing, and maybe this might be the quickest one ever, but
Sure.
I don't know what else somebody would need to support their kid. Maybe we'll throw in a couple other things here, but if you're starting with that, the I am the rock, and let's create controllable things and character skills, and let's, again, to Paul's point, and let's jump into this, the car ride home, before practices, games, before they're supposed to go on for an 8 o'clock lift. Oh, here's our things. Focus on these. And it's so much easier for us as parents when we have those, and we can go, this is what you said was important. It's not us trying to drive it. Trust me, I've been there. And as soon as with my two boys, as soon as we laid these out, here it is. This is what you said was important. So here it is. So let's touch on that car ride. Is that anything else the after games? Is there anything else you throw in there besides having this foundation built? This is, how did you do today in your character skills you wanted to work on? How did you do today in those controllable aspects? 0 for 4, 3 for 4, doesn't matter. Anything else you throw in there for the car ride?
Because we're trying to focus on controllables, I think it's important to call out one of like the main uncontrollable things that happen. So that would be like officiating or umpiring or whatever. I think that as parents, we try best we can to like make sure our kids are as happy or as joyful as often as we possibly can. A lot of times, like we feel like that's our job, is to, if they're down, we try to lift them up. And one of the ways that the athlete may try to get there in their own mind is to say, I struck out on that second at bat because I cannot believe that umpire called that ball down. And as a parent, it's like, that's like taking candy, like you're eating candy, like it tastes good right now, but in the long run, that's not good for you. And I would encourage you to, and only you know how to handle this with your athlete, but to try to find a tasteful way to be like, that's not what you should be talking about or thinking about or acting. Obviously, as parents, you also need to be able to model that. You can't be screaming stands at umpires and officials and then expect that afterwards you're going to tell your kid to not focus on that. So lay off the umpires and the officials, and in the car ride home, if that's the direction that your athlete wants to go with it, find a way to redirect that conversation to stuff that is, again, controllable. Umpires and officials are not controllable, so don't let them go there in their mind. And then, of course, for you as parents, wanting to make them happy like immediately, as fast as you can, don't resort to that. I would just highly encourage you not to resort to that, because that's going to create a spiral of characteristics we don't want. We don't want people that that lean into excuses. We don't want people that focus on giving their energy to uncontrollables. And then you want to watch kind of a team culture or a toxic culture develop. Get enough of those guys on a team or gals on a team that want to focus on officials all the time, and you'll see that team culture deteriorate. And hopefully you realize the role that you have in that, in not allowing that to be part of the conversation very much, if at all.
That's really good and really important. And I think ownership is one of the character skills that can be developed. And to your point, how do we do that? Like, no excuses. And trust me, parents, I know that is so hard when your kid gets called out on strike 3 and it was 6 inches outside. But to Paul's point, in the moment, it feels easy to blame that on the umpire. For me, that's an at-bat we just forget about. We just forget about. What could we have done different? Nothing. Right? Like, nothing. There's nothing. Again, you could go into that. Maybe he's calling it out there all day and we need to scoot closer to the plate. That's probably something they're talking about on the bench, and the coaches are saying, hey, we got, all these things. But we don't say, that one at bat costs us the game or changes anything else about the game. We just own it and we move on. And again, that's a character skill. So if you see your son or daughter really struggling with that, okay, let's start focusing on that as a character skill.
Yeah. You definitely don't need to take the side of the umpire or take the side of the official, because you're probably just going to frustrate your kid more if you do that. So don't mishear that. Like, you don't need to do that. You probably just need to figure out, like, that was a bad call. Like, maybe like you said, like, just forget about that at bat. Don't even give it any credit in your mind one way or another. But you don't have to agree with the official. You can just call it what it is, that it was a bad call, and like, just move on. Don't continue to give it energy though. Yeah.
And another character skill that can come from that is resilience. So how did they bounce back? Did they get right up? Were they, running out to the field next time, and was their next at bat a good at bat? So those are things that are controllable. We don't control the umpire, but we do control our response. So I don't know that parents need to be watching all these things, but if you feel like you're leaning too much into the result, or your son or daughter is leaning too much into the result, I think a lot of these podcasts can help. And you can pick and choose and say to yourself, let's look at where we're leaning too much in the result, and how can we shift that to controllables? What areas can our son or daughter get better at in the controllables? Is it walking up to the plate with good body language? Is it being resilient after that tough call? All these other things. So that's getting in pretty deep as a parent. Coaches should be watching that stuff. If you really know the game or the sport that you're watching, I would say you can watch that stuff. Otherwise, just be a fan, right? That's the best way to support. Don't dip your toe in stuff maybe that you don't know too much about. I talk about this with wrestling. When my kids wrestled, I knew nothing. And so I knew the best thing was to be, listen to your coaches. And I could watch the resiliency if they bounce back after, getting pinned or getting in a bad position or whatever. So you can watch that kind of stuff. But If you're unsure, just cheer on Johnny and Susie and their teammates and let the rest be as well. So really cool. Anything else on the support topic that you wanted to touch on?
No, I don't
As
think so.
we'll wrap this baby up. Really good. So I just think, to summarize, and let me know if you're good with this, Paul, be the rock, be the foundation, be solid. Don't ride the ups and downs. How do you do that? You help your son or daughter focus on the controllable aspects of their sport, and you help them focus on character skills that will lead them to being a better player and a better person. Often those things are intertwined. They're not necessarily separate. And I would say the last thing is, as Paul said, start with the end in mind. What are the goals of the athlete? And then you can work backwards and write this stuff down and have the family. Everybody knows these are the controllable things you focus on. These are the character skills you focus on. I'd say one other thing, and Paul kind of briefly mentioned this: model those behaviors. So when you're talking about that, being upset with the umpire, parents, if we don't model the correct response, the kids aren't going to get it, especially at a younger age. So model, ask your kids after games, if you didn't see the game, how did your team do? Not specifically how, because we want them to be great teammates. We want them to do that first. How was your energy? All those kinds of things. So model that. And a lot of times, so we have to take that look in the mirror to make sure we're not just talking the talk. We definitely have to walk the walk as well.
Yep. That's good.
Anything else, Paul?
Nope. I think that's awesome. Great job.
Awesome. All right. So thanks for tuning in, parents. Hopefully this helped, those few things on the best way to support your son or daughter. Again, we'll be doing these about once a week with Paul. If you have specific questions, things you're trying to work through, feel free to shoot me an email at mindrighttraining@gmail.com, or you can put a question in the show notes where you get your podcasts as well, and we'll try to get to those. Paul, thanks so much. We'll see you next time, buddy.
Thank you. See you soon.
Thank you for tuning into the podcast. Please be sure to like, follow, and especially share the podcast. If you want more information on strategies that you can use to help optimize your son or daughter's athletic experience, please check out my book, Parenting Athletic Kids. It's available on Amazon. Thanks again, and we'll be back with another podcast really soon.